Topic today is speciation, which is how animals turn into different other types of animals. And the question today, your essential question, is how do animals evolve into different types of animals? And you guys are on page 54 in your interactive notebook. So everybody's all set? All right. So first thing we'll get down is the definition of the word speciation. And quite literally, it's what it sounds like. It's formation of a new species. It's how new species form. So speciation is the process or the formation of a new species. And this is like the drawn out, but the fossil record of whales, as you can see, they go from like a land mammal to a semi to in the water to where they're at now. But that's the fossil record we have for whales, showing the speciation of them, the change of them from one type into another. And there's actually, as I was finding the video for today, there's a pretty decent video from the same group on how this happened in whales, like what the evidence is, where they can find the evidence and what that evidence means. So there's your definition for speciation. And now we're going to go over what it takes, like the processes that can cause animals to change from one thing into another. And the first thing is called reproductive isolation. And all that means is that for some reason, sometimes we'll go over all the different ways, but sometimes it's like geographic isolation, as in the Grand Canyon forms and the squirrels can't cross over to the Grand Canyon to breed with the squirrels on the other side, so they're reproductively isolated. They can't intermix their gene pool. Sometimes it has to do with behaviors, like if you've ever seen birds, they do like mating dances. There was that really weird one that like covers up its heads and it's like a meme or a meme or whatever it's called, where it covers up its head and like dances around and then like pokes its head back up and does this. Birds have different mating dances, and the female bird, when the male bird's doing like this, it's of the same species. It's like a real thing. She's like, ooh, that bird can dance just right. That's what I'm talking about. But the other birds watch it and they're like, that bird is crazy and I want nothing to do with it. It's like, so there's reproductive behavior that's involved in there. We'll talk about the different ways that things become reproductively isolated. So that's our kind of goal. Good to go? All right. And I try and provide examples of each one as we go through this. So the next one here has two birds on it. And I wonder if you might, one of those we've got locally, and one of them we have in Oregon, but one of them's right around here. Do you guys recognize either one of those things? Oh. This one's just a grouse. You see them in the woods or whatever. They take off from if you're walking through the woods, and they go, they make that big like explosive flap off sound. So these things we've got here in Oregon, just like around town, and these things are sage grouse, and they're grouse, but that's a male and this is a male. But these things, they've got these big air sacs in the front of their breast, the males do, and they beat them like drums to attract the females. They've got this big like hollow drum they can beat with their wings to make this big, deep booming sound to attract the females. And even though these things would be capable of breeding, they don't, because they've got different behaviors. They've got different mating rituals. You can hear the regular grouse, it's called the ruffed grouse, the ones we have out here. As you go through the woods sometimes and you're quiet, maybe you've heard it, they start off kind of beating their wings slow, like, and then they get faster and faster until it sounds like somebody's drumming on a snare drum or something like that. That's how they attract their mates. And these guys still use their wings to attract their mates, but they puff out that air sac that they've got and beat that, so it sounds bigger, it sounds deeper. But that's behavioral isolation. Things don't behave in the same manner, and as a result, they are not capable of breeding. We're thinking about breeding rituals and things like that. Called geographic isolation, and that's that the two populations end up separated by like barriers, like geographic barriers. An example would be squirrels on either side of the Grand Canyon. They can't even though they're less than a mile apart, they can't breed. One can't cross over to get to the other, and they're not capable of it. Another would be these guys. There are two different owls here, and they are the eastern screech owl and the western screech owl. One of them lives on the west side, one of them lives on the east side. What's the barrier between like the east side of the country and the west side of the country that these guys might not be able to get across? No, there's no wall, Nathan. East and west. That was Nathan Campbell, period 3. Yeah. So think about the big like divider that exists between like around Colorado area and runs north and south. There's a huge like range. Yes. Those mountains are called the Rockies. Yeah. Those things are so tall and they're actually growing. Those mountains are getting taller each year. So at one point in time they weren't there. And we had one continuous owl population. But as those things grew taller and taller, the owls stopped being able to fly over them to get to the other side. So those two populations are separate now. And as a result of their separation, we'll see if this still works, but as a result of their separation, they no longer speak the same language, basically. You know how all birds have bird calls? The eastern screech owl here, if this will play for us, sounds like this. What's that? Right. But if you ever hear that, that's the eastern screech owl. And once you get to the western screech owl, it speaks a little bit different language. That's it. That's all. And all that does, like those little sounds, are how they attract their mates. And they once made the same sound, but now they don't. And as a result, when one hears the other, they don't recognize that that could be something they could mate with. So they don't respond to it. They're not attracted to it. And that occurred because they were separated, and they both kind of developed their own language to go along with it. So that's geographic isolation. Let's do the same thing now. It's called temporal isolation. And that's that the species are capable of reproducing with each other, but they do it at different times of the year, so they're never in the same location at the breeding times. And that would be like salmon and steelhead, though they're capable. Steelhead are kind of going through their stuff January, February, March, and coho are like November, December. So they, even though they could, they're in the breeding locations at different times, so they end up not overlapping with each other. And that's just what it says here about steelhead and coho. And different things breed at different times of the year. Do you guys know when like elk calves and deer fawns are all born? Yeah, like right now. How come they time it to have all their babies in the springtime? That's probably part of it. And there's also, what's like unique about the spring? Yeah, things grow. There's all kinds of food available for them. So in order to do that, like animals have different breeding seasons. Deer breed a little later than elk. The elk ruts in like September because the elk takes them longer to develop a calf inside of them. But they give birth at about the same time. So though they're capable, they're at different times because they want their kids to come out at the same time when it's like warm, when they're not harsh conditions, when there's lots of food for them, and so on. So those are the 4 ways that it happens. We're going to talk briefly about what happened with Darwin's finches, since lots of his study were on Darwin's finches. We've got 2 slides for that, I believe, and that'll be it for us today for the notes. So you might mark it off or something in your notes as Darwin's finches from here, and it talks about how the original finch population that came over, turned into all the different finches that are on there today. So first off, it kind of matters. The Galapagos Islands, you saw it on a map when we did this originally, but it's off the northwestern side of South America, and it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90 to 100 miles offshore. And there weren't birds on it. Like there aren't bird fossils, there aren't things like that. But somehow, some way, they predict it was like a storm or something like that, blew a group of birds, like a flock of birds, off course, and they managed to land out here on the island to populate the island. It was all one type of bird that it started with, and they described that as like the founders arriving on the island. So they arrive, and new birds flew somehow, some way, with a windstorm or hurricane, whatever was occurring out there. But new birds arrived on those islands. There were no other birds on those islands at all. Nothing was there except for these guys. And they were the ones that like kind of took over and populated this whole place. And it was one type of bird. And as you can imagine, in North America, we've got lots of different types of birds. There are lots of different types of birds because there's lots of different stuff for them to eat. An eagle, this big, huge, predatory, scavenging bird, is not capable of eating like the same food that that little yellow bird is that lands on the bird feeder and eats stuff. It doesn't have the right beak. It doesn't have the body proportions it needs to do that. But what landed on this island was all a bird that was all the same species. So it's not like 100 different birds came over at once. One species of bird came over and landed on one of these islands. And from there, those birds flew, as they grew in population, they flew to the other islands of the Galapagos that we'll see today. So they went to one spot and then radiated out from there, spread out from there is what we predict happened. Once they did that and they arrived on this island, do you remember that mutations cause evolution, and that little mutations occur, and those little mutations can make you better at surviving or worse at surviving? So as each population landed on their island, whatever island they went to, there were mutations that occurred, and as a result, each population, each type of bird, kind of adapted to their environment. And the way they adapted that we're aware of is with their beaks. These all started out as the same species, but as they began to specialize in the food type that they wanted, their beaks changed in size. Big, thick beaks were for cracking fruit seeds and big seeds and stuff like that. Some of them have longer, narrower beaks than this that were for getting inside of cactuses and pulling out the seeds from inside cactuses. But wherever the birds landed, whatever habitat they were around, they evolved to suit that habitat best. And as those mutations and as the evolution continued, those adaptations led to what we call reproductive isolation. They were so different from each other that they were no longer able to breed with each other. They were capable, but they weren't willing to breed with each other. They wouldn't hybridize. They were so different after millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years that they were no longer willing to breed with each other. And that's that. So on that same page that you're on, we are going to switch over to the video of Darwin's finches that we've got here, and two researchers that studied them for about 20 years and tracked what was happening with the environment and what kind of changes those made within the bird populations. And something I'd like to point out is, as you guys go to college, you can get paid to do work like this as you're at college. If you want to go into the biology side or the science side, you can. These guys went to the Galapagos Islands every summer, camped out, captured birds, collected birds. I mean, they're in a really exciting place to be every summer, and the professors took students with them every year to do the work and do the capturing. So if you're interested in this kind of career, this is a job you can actually get paid for doing, capturing stuff, tracking it around, biological research. It's really kind of interesting. So I'll flip to this, and what I'm asking you guys to do with this, please, is that you are taking notes to go along with it. That's going to help you kind of understand how animals change over time. So like I said, it's about, it's about 15 minutes here is what we've got for this. That's about the plan.
planet has millions of species. Over 300,000 beetles alone. 17,000 butterflies. Thousands of mammals, fish, and birds, all astonishingly different. How did so many species come to be? To seek insights into that question, researchers are focusing on places